Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, today's deadline for federal workers to resign with pay is temporarily delayed. The latest of President Trump's plans to be blocked by a court.
How the federal funding freeze is limiting nonprofits' ability to operate, including community health care and Head Start programs.
And a leading democracy advocate examines the dramatic changes the Trump administration is making to the U.S. government.
Trump is simply doing things that are flatly, on their face, illegal, and seeing what happens.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On an American Cruise Line's journey along the Columbia and Snake Rivers, travelers retrace the route forged by Lewis and Clark more than 200 years ago. American Cruise Line's fleet of modern riverboats travel through American landscapes to historic landmarks, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. It has been perhaps the most significant day of court action for the second Trump administration so far.
Multiple judges have temporarily blocked efforts by President Trump to dramatically gut the federal government, and more lawsuits are yet to come. Laura Barone-Lopez has this report.
A federal judge in Washington paused a takeover by billionaire Elon Musk and his team, blocking their access for now from a sensitive Treasury Department payment system. That system holds personal information on millions of Americans, from Social Security numbers to bank account details. A group of unions argued the agency was illegally sharing information with Musk's team, known as the Department of Government Efficiency. Also today, an effort to purge the federal government of workers has been paused until Monday by a federal judge in Massachusetts. In an unprecedented move, Musk's team directly emailed 2 million civilian federal workers, urging them to take a deferred resignation offer by midnight tonight, promising pay through September. But unions representing workers who sued warned of a dangerous 1-2 punch, a loss of expertise, and the rise of partisanship over truth. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
The last time I checked in with Office of Personnel and Management, there was more than 40,000 individuals, federal workers, who had accepted the buyout program. We expect that number to increase.
The court intervention comes as Democrats step up their fight against a sweeping power grab by Musk, the wealthiest man in the world.
Our message is very clear. Elon Musk shouldn't be allowed to steal your money. Elon Musk shouldn't be allowed to steal your data.
And today, House Democrats, led by Hakeem Jeffries, announced legislation, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, to safeguard Americans' personal information.
What we are seeing unfold is an unlawful power grab by a unelected and unaccountable billionaire puppet master who's pulling the strings of House Republicans and apparently the Trump administration.
An effort unlikely to gain any Republican support. At the National Prayer Breakfast this morning, President Trump announced a new task force led by Attorney General Pam Bondi to root out so-called anti-Christian bias in the government.
While I'm in the White House, we will protect Christians in our schools, in our military, in our government, in our workplaces, hospitals, and in our public squares.
President Trump and congressional Republicans are also trying to avoid an intra-party war as they move to dramatically cut spending and regulations. In a meeting behind closed doors at the White House, Trump, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and other leaders ironing out details for how to navigate narrow GOP majorities and meet Johnson's own April timeline. Later tonight, the Republican-led Senate is expected to confirm another Trump nominee, Russell Vought, as director of the Office of Management and Budget.
To hear how bad Russell Vought is,
Democrats protested his nomination on the Senate floor throughout the night. Vought, like Musk, is on a mission to gut the federal government and is a chief architect of the controversial Project 2025 plan. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone-Lopez.
And we start the day's other headlines with college sports. The NCAA is updating its transgender policy to limit women's competition to athletes who were assigned as female at birth. The change comes a day after President Trump signed an executive order aimed at banning transgender athletes from girls' and women's sports. The policy is effective immediately, and it applies to all 500,000 NCAA athletes across the organization's 1,200 schools. Prior to this change, eligibility was based on rules set by each sport's national or international governing body. President Trump signed an executive order this afternoon sanctioning the International Criminal Court. The measure includes freezing assets of court employees who work on ICC investigations of U.S. citizens or allies such as Israel. It also blocks them from traveling to the U.S. The move comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is visiting Washington. Last year, the ICC issued arrest warrants for the prime minister and his former defense minister for alleged war crimes in Gaza, which they deny. Neither the U.S. nor Israel recognize the court's authority. Separately, it emerged today that Netanyahu gave President Trump a golden pager mounted on a wooden stand during their meeting in Washington yesterday. It's a not-so-subtle nod to Israel's operation in Lebanon last year when pagers and handheld radios were used to attack members of Hezbollah. In Panama, the country's president is pushing back on U.S. claims over transit fees for the Panama Canal. The U.S. State Department posted on social media last night that a deal was reached that would allow U.S. government vessels to pass through free of charge, saving the federal government millions of dollars a year. It followed Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit to the critical trade route earlier this week. But this morning, Panama's president rejected that claim, calling it flat-out false.
I am very surprised by the statement from the U.S. State Department. That is simply intolerable. And today, Panama, to you and to the world, expresses my absolute rejection of continuing to explore the path of managing the bilateral relationship based on lies and falsehoods.
Molino also said that waiving fees would violate both Panama's constitution and laws regulating the Panama Canal Authority. He also posted on social media that he plans to speak with President Trump about the issue tomorrow. There are growing concerns over the spread of bird flu after dairy cattle in Nevada became infected with a new variant of the disease. The latest strain is the second instance of the H5N1 virus spilling from birds to cattle. It's been linked to severe infections in humans, including the death of a person in Louisiana last month. But it's different from the type that was detected in cattle across 16 states last year. That's raised concerns about the wider spread of bird flu, though officials say the risk to the general population remains low. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed ahead of Friday's highly anticipated jobs report. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped about 125 points on the day. The Nasdaq headed higher, though, gaining nearly 100 points. The S&P 500 also closed in positive territory. And hip-hop music mogul Irv Gotti has died. He founded the influential label Murder, Inc. with his brother in the late 1990s and went on to produce dozens of hits. And I gave you my all, now baby, be mine. Gotti helped launch the careers of artists like Ja Rule and Ashanti and worked with other stars like DMX and Jay-Z. Murder, Inc. was once investigated for allegedly laundering drug money. Gotti, whose real name was Irving Lorenzo, was charged but eventually acquitted. No cause of death was given, but he battled diabetes and suffered a stroke last year. Irv Gotti was 54 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, the Trump administration's aggressive dismantling of efforts to fight climate change. The engineering skills of beavers offers insights into managing water resources. And the so-called poet of Havana uses his art and music to address politics and pain.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
A broad federal funding freeze announced by the Trump administration last week and blocked by a pair of judges is destabilizing a wide range of programs despite the court interventions. Over the past few days, some health care and Head Start programs report they have sporadically been blocked from funding, forcing some to shut down. Political correspondent Lisa Desjardins has been investigating what's happening and joins us now to share what she has found. So Lisa, what have you found? Who's being affected here?
Right, NewsHour's been in front on this. I've been doing 3 days of reporting with Ali Rogan as well to figure out what's happening here. And I want to talk about two specific areas. One, Head Start programs around the country, and also community health care centers. Both of them are funded in large part through the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Here's what we know. There have been funding problems in the last week and day. Head Start programs in 27 states have felt these sporadic funding freezes, many of them still feeling it. Those serve 20,000 kids and families, the affected programs. Now, community health centers in at least 9 states over the past few days have also been blocked from accessing and being able to get their funding. Now, Head Start programs, of course, are focused on early childhood learning and families. Some of them have already spent some of this money and they needed to recoup it as part of the program. In Washington state, Head Start programs have had these blocks. They call them rolling blackouts.
So this created an incredible amount of chaos and confusion across our community. It meant a lot of programs, even up until yesterday, were worried about paying their rent, paying their staff. And, at the end of the day, what really impacts are the kids and the families. They're the ones that are depending on childcare. And if their childcare is closed, that means they miss work.
And there was a program that had to close in Washington state because of this. Now, I want to stress this is sporadic. Some programs are able to access the funds, some aren't. At the same time, I want to talk about the other major program that we're looking at, the community health centers across this country. Ali Rogan has done incredible reporting here. She documented that it's happened in at least 9 states, and one of them is the state of Virginia, where one center was closed at one point because of the problem. The issue is the payment management services, it's called also PMS, that has these health centers waiting for their funds. One of the CEO in Virginia of the community health centers told us this all has been happening with no warning.
But all of a sudden it went down with no notification, nothing. We had to hear from health centers texting me to let us know, well, we can't get into the PMS system again. So I say that with the asterisk that now we are in a life of uncertainty. And we've never, frankly, ever been in this situation.
Now, an important reminder that community health centers in this country serve 1 in 10 Americans, and they serve 1 in 5 people in rural America.
This comes after the funding freeze proposal, but that has been blocked by the courts. Do we know what's behind these blocks that they're seeing?
We asked HHS because at first it seemed like that's where all of this was coming from. And in fact, for these two groups, that's where the issue is. So let's explain what HHS responded to us with last night and then again today when we asked about community health centers. Wrote us that some payment management system users experienced technical issues last week. The system is back up and running now, but users may be experiencing lags due to the high volume of requests. So they're saying something happened with the system and now they're just trying to process all the people that were backlogged. Well, let's think about this. What we know is last week that funding freeze went in place. Trump administration folks were saying it was not supposed to affect some of these programs, but they did feel it temporarily. So the switch went off, the switch went back on, and now there's a thinking that somehow the system couldn't manage that. However, we don't know for sure that that's the case here because our Laura Barón Lopez, as she's reported in this very chair many times before, has been asking the Trump administration repeatedly, are you following the court orders that say to reinstate all of this funding? She has not gotten a response. So we really don't know exactly what's happening behind the scenes.
At the same time, we know the funding freeze is affecting many of those programs who have had funding restored. So what about the wider programs that have felt the same jolt?
Right. It's important to know there's a universe of programs that are concerned here about grants and ultimate funding. Some of them are individual tailored, like Women's Infant and Children program that helps mothers and fathers who are dealing with low income salaries. And one of those we talked to is a woman named Sarah Manassara, who lives in New York City. She's got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and she says she really depends on the eggs and the other healthy foods that she can get from WIC. And last week, that funding grant pause, the fear about it, really put her in a bad situation, really fearful because so much for her is at stake.
Threatening to take away literally fruits and vegetables, eggs, milk and formula from babies is really the worst thing I can think of, and it's not acceptable. So it's not only about the stress, it's also about being able to maintain our health, and it's about us being able to live and survive. So that's really what's at stake here.
She's still funded, but it's a climate of fear. Trump allies have said that's the kind of program that they want to look at.
You've also been looking at a number of other programs in government and out under scrutiny because of the Trump administration's efforts to end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. What's the latest?
It's not really clear what's applying there, and we know that programs around the country are having unexplained blocks on some of these, and outside of HHS, that they think may be related to these DEI executive orders. Now, one program we talked to was a domestic abuse shelter. Kyle Maduro spoke to them in Pennsylvania. And the manager there, Lauren Peterson, said DEI for them means that they are including everyone, especially vulnerable populations. They have a DEI site on their website. And she said, it's important for us that we make sure to include everyone. That's a big stake item for us. Meanwhile, we know that there are problems in funding elsewhere, including with some mental health programs, some substance abuse programs, DHS, USDA, all of these unexplained funding blocks that we're watching very carefully.
And you're going to continue to watch those all. Lisa Desjardins, thank you.
You're welcome.
While many of President Trump's nominees have been confirmed by the Senate at a breakneck pace, Kash Patel, his nominee to lead the FBI, will have to wait another week for a key Senate committee vote. That's because Democrats on the Judiciary Committee forced a delay over objections to Mr. Patel's plans for mass firings at the FBI.
The FBI director's loyalty must be to the American people, to the Constitution, and to the rule of law. But Mr. Patel has made it clear that his loyalty is to the president. He has threatened to come after, those are his words, in the past, the president's critics.
Even without Patel in place, acting leadership at the Bureau is moving ahead on a plan to remove as many as 4,000 employees who investigated the Capitol attack and President Trump's handling of classified documents. That effort, for now, is tied up in court. For a Republican perspective, we're joined tonight by Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Jeff.
So you heard Senate Democrats again today make the case that FBI Director nominee Kash Patel is unqualified. They say that he's a partisan political actor, or worse, a conspiracy theorist who would turn the FBI into a tool of Donald Trump's retribution. What about his background, his past work, his past public comments suggests to you that Democrats are wrong?
Well, he was a prosecutor. He was a public defender. He was chief of staff at the Department of Defense. He's held high-level government positions before. And I think, interestingly, he was a victim of lawfare himself. I think the FBI is ripe for real reform. It's been weaponized in ways we've never seen before under the Biden administration and Christopher Wray. The FBI went after Catholics. The FBI went after parents who showed up at school board meetings. The FBI pre-bunked the Hunter Biden laptop story. So, I think that's why you've seen approval ratings plummet for the FBI, because of the political nature of their leadership. There's a lot of great men and women who work for the FBI, but I think Kash Patel is going to come in there with the experience and a reform agenda to get it back to what it should be, which is fighting violent crime in this country.
Well, in his 2023 book titled Government Gangsters, he included a list of 60 perceived Trump critics that Democrats argue functions as an enemies list. If he's not going to be focused on retribution as they see it, why the need for a list of potential targets?
Well, that was their characterization of a footnote in his book, in the endnotes, actually. He was pretty clear in his testimony that he's committed. He came to this country as an immigrant. He believes very deeply in the American experiment. He believes that people should be treated fairly under the law. And I think having the perspective of the abuses that we've seen over the last 4 years, again, going after Catholics and parents and political enemies, he wants to put a stop to that. Pam Bondi wants to put a stop to it too. She'll be leading and sworn in as Attorney General. So I think there's a real opportunity to get back to a place where our law is being applied fairly, that we don't have two tiers of justice that we saw under the Biden administration.
I want to ask you about the potential for mass firings at the FBI, namely the thousands of FBI employees who worked on the investigations into the Capitol attack. As you well know, many of those agents involved worked in the FBI's counterterrorism division. So these are folks who investigate threats not only in the U.S., but from overseas, from groups like ISIS, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the list goes on. The FBI Agents Association says that just the mere threat of these firings distracts and destabilizes the FBI workforce. Are you worried that this makes the country, as a result, less safe?
Well, I think, honestly, you look at what's the approval rating that's plummeted over at the FBI in the last 4 years because of the weaponization of the Biden administration. That's kept really good people away from the FBI that might have applied who don't want to belong to a Stalin-like political retribution campaign. That's what we've seen. Those are the facts. That's what we've seen in the last 4 years. What Kash Patel testified about in that committee hearing, I thought was really refreshing. He said that about a third of the FBI agents are in Washington, D.C. right now. Get those FBI agents across the country to take on violent crime, to take on human trafficking. There's cities all across this country that could use that sort of help. That's what he's talked about. So regardless of the fear-mongering that's taking place about what's actually going to happen, that's not what's going to happen. Now, look, if there are people in the Department of Justice that had a political angle and wanted to subvert our justice system by settling political scores, of course they should be dismissed. But that's not what we're talking about. People who are doing counterterrorism, as you mentioned in your question, those people are going to have their jobs, and we want to reward people for doing a good job. But I think we should also make sure that we don't have political hacks executing a political agenda in these agencies.
Well, let's talk more about these changes, because to your point, many of the rank and file within the FBI do say that there needs to be some changes made to the structure and the management of the FBI. So what kind of changes do you think that Kash Patel would bring about?
Well, I think, again, about a third of all those FBI employees work in Washington, D.C. And now obviously there need to be some people here. But I think it was a refreshing kind of reform idea, which is to say, let's get those folks in St. Louis. Let's get those folks in Chicago. Let's get those folks, around the border where we see human trafficking from the cartels. There's a lot of good things that the FBI can do, but sadly, I think there's been a lot of distractions.
We should say, before you were the senator from Missouri, you were the state's attorney general. And I want to ask you about this moment in time, because we have a president in President Trump who has a highly expansive view of executive power and a movement of conservatives who appear to be supporting or promoting this vision of the presidency with almost no limits. How do you see the role of the executive, and how do you see your role as a member of a co-equal branch of government?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I wonder if you asked any Democrats about this the last 4 years, because we had Joe Biden, who bulldozed the Constitution when he tried to forgive $500 billion worth of student loan debt. The Supreme Court said you don't have the ability to do it. Joe Biden tried to do it again and again and kept getting slapped down. He charged OSHA, which was created to make sure forklifts beep when they back up, with forcing the COVID shot on 100 million Americans. I know something about this.
I hear the point that you're making, but Joe Biden's not the president.
No.
I'm asking about President Trump.
Right, but I want to put this in context, because the Democrats have somehow found religion now on the separation of powers. What I can tell you is that the executive branch, which is all of this, sort of trying to find waste, fraud, and abuse, the president, of course, has authority to do that within the executive branch. USAID was created through an executive order. So I think it's important to reveal the facts here. We should absolutely be reviewing abuse within the executive branch, and that's what President Trump is doing.
Senator Eric Schmitt of Missouri, thanks again for joining us this evening. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
The first 2 weeks alone of the Trump administration have brought dramatic proposals and some unprecedented changes in our systems of government. Tonight, we begin a new series of interviews called On Democracy, taking a step back to look at big questions around our laws, institutions, and norms and how they're changing. We begin with Barton Gellman, a longtime journalist and senior advisor at the Brennan Center for Justice. That's a nonpartisan think tank at New York University's School of Law. Bart Gellman, welcome back to the NewsHour. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Bart, I want to begin with these tabletop exercises you and your colleagues ran last May and June, role-playing both a Democratic and Republican potential presidency. On the Republican side, you looked at what would happen if Donald Trump came into office and made good on a lot of the public promises and pledges he made, how the system of checks and balances would work. So how does what you've seen over the last 2 weeks plus line up with what you saw back in those exercises?
So we did 5 different tabletop exercises. 2 of them were called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And those are the ones that Trump is going through with, in which he is launching attacks on multiple fronts all over the federal government against the government itself. And he is doing so baldly in defiance of the law and in some cases the Constitution. He is firing people he doesn't have the power to fire, or he's firing people without giving them hearings or reasons that are required by law. He tried to stop $3 trillion of payments that Congress had appropriated when it is Congress under Article 1 of the Constitution that has the power of the purse, not the president. He has fired inspectors general. This resembles basically the worst case we had in our tabletop exercises.
Was there anything that you didn't include in your exercises that you have seen in the last couple of weeks that's particularly concerned you?
Yeah, well, we did not anticipate that Trump would offload so much presidential power onto a billionaire in the person of Elon Musk. We did not anticipate that a private citizen would be given access to the entire Office of Personnel Management files and the Treasury payment system that covers $3 trillion. We don't believe that's lawful, and I think it'll take a little time for courts to come to that conclusion.
That kind of access to government and sensitive and classified information by Elon Musk and his team, it's been described to us, especially with regards to what we've seen at the USAID, as state capture. Is that how you see it? And is that kind of thing easily replicable across other agencies?
Look, if Elon Musk is going to go into any given agency and assert the power to take control of their computer system with system administrator privileges, that just gives enormous power to retrieve, create, and even alter data. We don't know what he's doing with that. Some of that data would be potentially very valuable to Elon Musk's private interests. Is he making copies of it? Some of that data represents, for example, the questionnaires filled out by 4 million people who have classified clearances, in which they answer every kind of personal question there is, including what could be used to blackmail you, and that's in these files that he has access to now.
Limiting some of Musk's access, halting the freezing of federal funds, issuing injunctions on birthright citizenship, and so on. Are the courts here, as you see it, sort of the most robust guardrail?
Well, they are the only coordinate branch of government right now that is not fully under the control of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. So he's captured both houses of Congress. Although he has appointed a lot of judges in his first term, and although he has a very friendly Supreme Court sitting on top, the judges are still, and this is judges appointed by multiple presidents, are still trying to enforce basic rule of law. Trump is simply doing things that are flatly, on their face, illegal, and seeing what happens.
Bart, if lawmakers, and specifically Republican lawmakers, aren't acting as the guardrails you expected to see, the courts themselves will take a while to play out here in terms of those cases. Are there other guardrails that you saw in your exercises or expected to see in real life that you haven't yet?
Well, there are other guardrails. There are other points of leverage. Trump really cares about public opinion and his polling numbers. He really cares about the stock market. So when he does something that crashes the market, he will pay a price for that. The idea that he would pardon all the criminals who rioted and mobbed at the Capitol on January 6th, more than 60% of Americans disapprove of that. The fact that he then goes on to try to fire everyone in the Justice Department who participated in prosecuting those people, also very unpopular. And I am expecting that there will be at some point a backlash against these sort of lawless actions.
You know, we need to underscore here, we are talking about a democratically elected leader in our president right now. Half of all voters did vote for him, not despite what he said and promised to do, but because of what he said and promised to do. Does this say to you that America is in sort of a strongman era, that all of these actions that concern you are exactly what people wanted to see?
There is some percentage of the electorate that likes a strongman, that likes authoritarians, that likes the idea that let's get someone who's going to cut through all the nonsense and get things done. But that's always a minority. I don't think it's even a majority of MAGA. People felt that the country was on the wrong track. People did not approve of Joe Biden. People were very worried about things like inflation. But Trump is not lowering the price of eggs. Trump is firing the watchdogs whose job it is to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. That's exactly what he claims to be trying to prevent, is waste, fraud, and abuse. And I just don't believe that there's a majority of Americans who said, yes, I want the president to come in and break the law.
Barton Gellman of the Brennan Center for Justice. Bart, thank you so much. It's good to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
Among the many other big moves taken by the Trump administration, boosting fossil fuel development has been a priority. In a series of actions, President Trump is following through on his promise not just to ramp up oil and gas production, but to sharply curtail any effort to deal with climate change. William Brangham has been tracking this and joins us now. So, William, we've already seen major action these first 2 weeks on the Trump administration's energy policy. What are the biggest moves so far?
He has been going gangbusters, as my mom used to put it, on many fronts, myriad ways he's been doing this. He's been doing this through federal government agencies like the EPA, through his appointments, his cabinet secretaries at Energy and Interior, and through executive orders. A couple of examples. On day one, he declared an energy emergency, which basically tells every federal agency to do everything they can to ramp up oil and gas production on federal lands. Trump has also pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, the global treaty to bring down emissions. He's back out of that again. He's targeted Biden's push for electric vehicles. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's just been a lot of efforts to go on this front.
And we know that with President Trump, personnel is so often policy. Who are the people in his administration who are backing him up on this?
That's right. The argument that his cabinet secretaries and that he has been making all along is that the Biden administration held back domestic energy production. And we should say, oil and gas production in America is at record highs right now, and it became so under the Biden administration. But all of Trump's cabinet picks argue that Biden didn't do enough on that front, and they promised to do differently. So that's Lee Zeldin at the EPA, that is Chris Wright at Energy, and that includes Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who described during his confirmation hearings how the Trump administration will do things differently.
When energy production is restricted in America, it doesn't reduce demand. It just shifts productions to countries like Russia and Iran, whose autocratic leaders not only don't care at all about the environment, but they use their revenues from energy sales to fund wars against us and our allies. President Trump's energy dominance vision will end those wars abroad, will make life more affordable for every family in America by driving down inflation. And President Trump will achieve those goals while championing clean air, clean water, and protecting our beautiful lands.
So this raises the question then, William, of what does this mean for President Biden's signature achievement on climate, the Inflation Reduction Act?
President Trump, one of his first actions was to issue an executive order that dealt specifically with terminating the Green New Deal. That's how he refers to all of these kinds of efforts. And that ordered all federal agencies to pause any of the money that was appropriated under the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Act. They had to clarify later to say it was really only climate-related things, but that is still a large part of that bill. So this order now means that a lot of those projects that were underway all over the country and the jobs connected to them are on hold. That could be things like big battery manufacturing plants to a $5 billion loan to clean up school buses and make them electric. We talked to Julie McNamara. She's an analyst at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Here's what she said this means.
We've seen projects have to be stopped. We've seen companies starting to reconsider whether or not they'll move forward here. That is a terrible outcome for our country, and it has these long-lasting ramifications. And so by having this coordinated effort to send this chill that this is not a place that will be welcoming of new investment, it's a deep concern.
So there is some uncertainty as to how effective Trump will be at gutting that act, but this historic effort to ramp up batteries, wind, solar, nuclear, to address climate change, all of those things are in doubt.
And this is all unfolding as we're getting more warnings about the climate. Last month was the world's hottest January on record. Last year was the hottest year on record. Tell us more.
That's right. There's a new study out from climate scientist Jim Hansen. He was one of the first scientists to ring this alarm bell about climate back in the 1980s. He has a new paper out which is a bit of an outlier, but he has been vindicated very often in the past. His paper says that warming is accelerating faster than we anticipated, that the goal of the Paris Accords to hold warming below 2 degrees Celsius compared to industrial times, that is virtually out of reach, and that some of these more serious climate tipping points might be unavoidable. Whether you dismiss his paper or not, his concern is affirmed by the vast majority of scientists that our use of coal and oil and gas is changing this climate to a dangerous and unpredictable way. We talked earlier with Chris Field at Stanford's Woods Institute. Here's how he describes it.
The evidence for climate change and the human role in causing the warming that we've seen in recent decades is really overwhelmingly clear. There are no Democratic or Republican thermometers. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. It just means we have a more serious problem to deal with by the time we finally get serious about addressing it.
Of course, President Trump doesn't think we need to do this. He thinks all of these concerns about climate change are exaggerated and overblown, and he is directing his administration and now the federal government to act accordingly.
William Brangham, our thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
And now a very different kind of story about the environment. Beavers and the dams they build are not always embraced in certain areas. They can create problems with flooding, crops, and other damage. But there's a growing recognition that they're also building a kind of natural infrastructure that helps with water management, wildfire mitigation, and the climate. Science correspondent Miles O'Brien went to see the beavers at work during their busy season and has the story for our ongoing coverage of the environment called Tipping Points.
This team of scientists is gearing up to get waist deep on a quest to better understand nature's hard-working engineers and climate warriors, beavers. They invited me along, and I was, well, eager to join them.
Going deep into the world of beavers here.
Leading this happy band of beaver believers is Emily Fairfax. She's an eco-hydrologist, an assistant professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. We met in southern Wyoming.
We're about to go into the beaver wetlands now.
We're in the Medicine Bow National Forest. And we're going into a beaver complex, which is like a huge beaver neighborhood, maintained by one beaver family.
Before we began our trek, we got an advanced peek, thanks to Emily's prowess as a drone pilot.
So right now I'm flying over the corridor that the beavers have dammed, and we're seeing quite a few beaver ponds.
In 2020, a big wildfire ripped through here. There is still plenty of evidence of that. Dead gray trees starkly define the edges of a lush, linear oasis.
How long does this green swath go?
So right now I've flown a half a kilometer away along this path, and it's all beaver engineered. We think this is just one family doing this work here. But they take little.
One family?
One family.
And for more than a kilometer?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see them, but they sure are busy. The parents mate for life. They have a litter once a year, anywhere between 1 and 6 kits.
So in a given family at a given time, you could expect there to be somewhere between 6 and 10 beavers with the parents, the quote-unquote teenage beavers, and then the little kits.
Beavers build dams for protection. The water cover they create is an effective defense against predators for a semi-aquatic rodent.
This is all about just having a protected area to move around.
Yep.
That's all it is.
This is all about safety, protected area. We're in one pond right now, but if you look at this place from above, you'll see there's probably 14, 15 beaver dams in a row. They can go all the way up and down this river corridor and stay in the water 95% of the time, access more food, access more building material, and generally have a bigger area to roam.
Emily and I were knee-deep in a pond that has captured her scientific interest. She and her team got to work.
So what's our temp here?
11.7.
Depth of the sponge? 3, 4,
94
5,
centimeters.
6, 7.
94 centimeters.
And then our flow rate?
0.0.
All the measuring of the sediment, all the things you're doing here. Give us a sense of what you're after.
This is a post-fire site, so there has been a lot of burning here around the beaver wetland. The wetland's intact. One of the things we want to know is how much sediment is this pond catching?
The team often gets below the surface. At this pond in Colorado, snorkeling to see beaver engineering and the sediment it traps. This dampens the causes and effects of wildfires.
The most visually dramatic is clearly the refugia, or this fireproof patch. Like, we have mature pine trees here, we have mature willows, we have beavers, we have this sediment capture, we have all sorts of different things that are continuing to provide benefits.
The streams that flow through here are the headwaters of the Colorado, one of the most overutilized rivers in the world. The natural infrastructure beavers build can really help the river.
So every one of these wetlands is like a speed bump for the water, delaying that water. And especially as we see climate change and things get warmer and we have more rain and less snow, it's really important to keep the water up in the headwaters longer.
Scientists estimate there were between 100 and 400 million beavers in North America before European migration. For a few centuries, beavers were trapped for their pelts and killed as nuisances to near extinction. Beavers can cause unwelcome flooding on property and crops. Videos showing their dams and lodges being gleefully blown to smithereens are all over social media. But land managers are now more likely to see them as an ally, and they're taking some unusual steps to try to bring back more beavers. Scott Miller is the Aquatic Resources Program lead for the Federal Bureau of Land Management. He's at the center of a campaign to restore streams and rivers and the lush vegetation that borders them, so-called riparian zones. To do that, he's thinking like a beaver, building beaver dam analogs.
This is just a hand-built structure trying to mimic what beaver naturally do. We first drive the post into the ground. We put some sod in, and then we're weaving willow and aspen branches between the poles, and then we're putting some more sod in. They can be built in anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours, depending on the size and complexity.
They're building 100 of them here at the Muddy Creek watershed near Rawlins, Wyoming. Lots of little structures instead of a few big, overbuilt ones.
This system is starting to naturally recover. Maybe it would traditionally take a decade, and we're trying to get that same amount of improvement in 3 to 5 years by coming in here and doing this work.
Cattle rancher Tom Chant and his father before him have been working this patch of land along Muddy Creek for more than 20 years. When they first got here, it was trampled by overgrazing sheep. If we were standing here 22 years ago on this day, what would it look like here?
I remember coming down here, and this would be a dust cloud when the cattle come right down this creek. There was no vegetation.
The BLM improved roads, built fences to allow for rotational grazing, encouraged the growth of willow trees, and built the beaver dam analogs. So do your fellow ranchers, are they skeptical of this?
Any of them that potentially are on the fence, they must not like grass, right? Like, we're shading the creek, cooling the water temperature. Cows are happier when they got a cold drink of water at 90 degrees, right?
Tom Chant has 2 sons, rodeo stars in the making. He hopes they will one day succeed him in running the ranch. He thinks nature's engineers will make the succession a little easier. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Miles O'Brien, near Rollins, Wyoming.
As Cuba stands to become even more isolated, many Cubans are leaving. By one estimate, there's already been a 10% drop in population in recent years, though actual numbers are likely higher. Those who stay on the island are essentially cut off from family in the United States. Singer Carlos Varela, known as the Poet of Havana, has spent decades putting the pain of that political divide into song. Here's senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown with his second report from Havana for our series, Canvas and Art in Action, exploring the intersection of art and democracy.
Una palabra no dice nada.
One word says nothing, sings Carlos Varela, but at the same time, it hides everything. A renowned and beloved Cuban singer-songwriter, Varela is a master of imagery and language.
Como las flores que esconde el lodo.
Singing words, as in one of his best-known songs, Una Palabra, that have spoken loud and clear, if often through metaphor and poetry, to several generations of Cubans.
Es un misterio.
It's a mystery. But the power of words, the power of a verse, the power of a song, the power of a book, that's a blessing, because words can transform. They can reach your soul and your heart. They can shake your bones. They can change your life, and that can't be lost.
No se puede perder.
We recently joined Varela as he rehearsed at his Havana home studio and talked about his unusual life in music, a star in a country he loves but has often been at odds with.
I have dedicated myself to know the problems of my people because for me, songwriting is not a job, it's therapy. If I don't write songs, I go crazy. So this is my way of saying all that I feel based on what I see, read, and hear. The story has always been like in my generation, a dissatisfied youth that's constantly questioning things.
Born in 1963 and raised in Havana, his first love was theater. But in his 20s, he turned to music, to Nueva Trova, a Cuban genre of folk singer-songwriters that emerged in the 1960s and addressed social issues. Learned from and was embraced by Cuban stars such as Silvio Rodriguez and Pablo Milanés. Varela was part of a post-revolutionary generation that experienced the full brunt of the so-called special period of the 1990s, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and end of the support it provided Cuba, leaving his country in near economic collapse. Living in a one-party communist regime still run by the heirs of Fidel Castro, he sung of both the country's beauty and promise, but also its problems. A dissent not directly political, but there for all to hear.
What really amazes me is that so many people find their voice through my songs. But to be honest, I did not write them with that purpose. So my songs almost always ask questions. No? Why? Till when? Why not?
Do you see yourself as a political songwriter?
No, I don't like politics, and I also don't like politicians. Politicians should all be on Animal Planet. But I do have societal concerns, therefore they are political. And that's why for 43 years I have written songs that make politicians uncomfortable in Cuba and outside of it. I agree with Bob Dylan when he says he's not interested in spreading one message only. That's how I think.
Through the years, Cuban authorities have regularly banned his music from the radio and kept him from performing. His last large public concert in 2022 came after mass protests a year earlier were quickly put down. At the concert, chants of freedom were heard in the audience.
I didn't ask them to shout, but I'm also not going to ask you not to shout. Be free. And that evidently didn't sit well with the politicians.
The beauty of his music, the power of his songwriting have captured younger generations, including 26-year-old keyboard player Rodrigo Garcia.
Sometimes people were just thinking, how is he telling those things, you know, in the songs? And the people were like, wow. I was in a lot of concerts of Carlos, and it was amazing because thousands of people knowing the songs, but at the same time they were just waiting to say what the songs were saying.
He was expressing what they were feeling.
Yeah.
Varela has been championed by American musical stars, including Jackson Browne, who recorded a translated version of Varela's song, Walls and Doors. The two performed together in Havana in 2015. He's performed in this country sporadically, including on PBS Live from Lincoln Center, Seasons of Cuba with violinist Joshua Bell, where he sang Walls and Doors with Dave Matthews. But he's also been denied visas, caught in the middle of U.S.-Cuban political strife and travel restrictions. In 2009, guitar in hand, he even lobbied on Capitol Hill for more open relations. Today, he says this.
While politicians can or can't come to an agreement, Cuban and U.S. artists and writers can achieve what the politicians haven't been able to in 60-something years. That's what Walls and Doors is about. And in my song, there's a verse that says, "And still the grandparents from both shores cast their bait, the blame, and the seed." And we all know that in these 60-something years, many people have profited from the industry of hatred to make money. The worst thing is that the people are the ones who pay for all the blame.
In his song Foto de Familia, or Family Photo, Varela mourns the broken Cuban family and individual families split by those who left and those who remain behind. In recent years, migration from the island has accelerated, driven by a teetering economy, soaring inflation, and the loss of tourist dollars with renewed U.S. restrictions on travel to the island.
I love my country deeply, and I deeply love the generations that lived with me in my country. It pains me deeply to see how so many friends leave every day, going away searching for a possible uncertain future. This is also what my songs talk about. This could be a wonderful, prosperous country simply by opening the doors and opening the soul and the individual freedom of all Cubans to develop all their talent in their own land. For that to happen, many dinosaurs must disappear.
Is the idea or the hope of democracy here in Cuba possible? Is it just a dream?
It's a dream, but not only is it possible, it's necessary. All human beings have different thoughts, and there's no perfect society. But neither is the Cuban one, with a single party, a single opinion. If you don't think like me, then you might go to prison. No. A society has to develop based on the diversity of opinion, of criteria, Of course, democracy in Cuba is possible. It can be. I have faith and I dream that it will be, and I hope it's very soon.
Carlos Varela sang for us one of his signature songs, Habaname, My Havana. Havana, Havana, if only a song were enough to give you back everything that time took from you.
Lo que el tiempo te quitó.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Havana, Cuba.
Si supieras el dolor que siento cuando te canto y no entiendes que es amor.
Online right now, you can see more from Jeffrey Brown's trip to Cuba. He spoke with some of the nation's youngest musicians about what music means to them and the role it plays in their lives. That's on our YouTube page.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.